The last day of death row, inmate Caryl Chessman, the man who cheated death 8 times. Hello friends, and welcome back to Deathwatch Diaries. Tonight, we revisit one of the most haunting stories ever to come out of San Quentin, an execution that became a worldwide spectacle. His name was Caryl Chessman, the so-called Red Light Bandit, a career criminal, a high school dropout, yet also a self-taught lawyer who turned his prison cell into a courtroom and a publishing house. He wrote books that made him famous across the globe, fought off execution dates with appeals, and became the face of a growing movement against capital punishment. 8 times the clock ticked down, and 8 times Chessman found a way to stop it. But on his 9th date with death, the world held its breath. Would he escape again, or had his luck finally run out? Stay with me as we walk through his final 24 hours. And don't forget, subscribe for more prison documentary stories that linger long after they end. Caryl Chessman was no ordinary death row inmate. Born in 1921, he grew up in Los Angeles, drifting into crime as a young man. By his late teens, he was already known to police for car thefts, robberies, and shootouts. He later admitted that hate and guile had been his tools, describing himself as a grinning young criminal. But what secured his place on death row was something far more controversial than his criminal history. In 1948, Los Angeles was plagued by a figure who came to be known as the Red Light Bandit. Couples parked on secluded roads at night were pulled over by a car flashing a red light, imitating a police cruiser. A masked man robbed them, sometimes assaulting the women, and in 2 cases, he forced victims to move from one location to another. Under California's Little Lindbergh law, kidnapping with injury was punishable by death, even if no one had been killed. Chessman was convicted under this statute. The case was far from straightforward. Witnesses identified him in lineups that Chessman insisted were tainted. The evidence was circumstantial, yet the law was clear. He was sentenced to die in the gas chamber at San Quentin. What set Chessman apart from thousands of other inmates was his ability to turn his prison cell into a pulpit. He became his own lawyer, studying legal texts by the dim light of his cell, and filing appeal after appeal. His persistence was extraordinary. On one occasion, a misplaced comma in a legal document delayed his execution. Another time, a last-minute motion earned him a reprieve just moments before he was due to walk to the chamber. Meanwhile, he began writing. 4 books in total, including Cell 24-55 Death Row, became bestsellers. His words traveled beyond prison walls, touching readers in America and across the world. Suddenly, Chessman was not just an inmate, he was a cause. World leaders and celebrities added their voices. The Pope, Eleanor Roosevelt, foreign diplomats, and writers like Ray Bradbury all condemned the idea of executing him under a statute many considered archaic and unjust. In Buenos Aires, in London, and in college campuses across America, his name became synonymous with the debate over capital punishment. By May 2, 1960, the pressure was enormous. Chessman's attorneys, Rosalie Asher and George Davis, were still working frantically to save him. They argued 2 main points. First, that another suspect, a man named Charles Terranova, matched the physical description of the Red Light Bandit as well as Chessman did. Second, that keeping a man on death row for 12 years was itself cruel and unusual punishment, violating the Constitution. In the governor's office, the phone lines were jammed with last-minute pleas. College students, clergymen, Quaker activists, and even Hollywood stars marched across the Golden Gate Bridge carrying banners and candles. Governor Pat Brown, though personally conflicted, had already exhausted his powers. Just weeks earlier, he had narrowly failed to secure a moratorium on executions in the state legislature. Now, he said, the law left him no room to act. Inside San Quentin, Chessman seemed calm, even resigned. He ate a simple final meal, a ham and cheese sandwich with a bottle of Coca-Cola. Then came the ritual of the walk, down the long row of cells. He paused at each one, exchanging words and handshakes with 17 fellow inmates. At the last cell, the man inside was asleep. They didn't wake him. After the procession, Chessman was led into the ready room, a small holding cell near the chamber. There was no bed, only a folding desk, a toilet, and silence. He refused the chaplain's prayers, choosing instead to keep his law books and typewriter close. Even in those last hours, he typed, edited, and prepared as if one more appeal might still save him. He did sleep briefly, in fragments, waking to read or jot notes. At dawn, he washed, combed his hair, and dressed in clean prison clothes, the last he would ever wear. Breakfast was served, but he barely touched it. Outside the prison gates, the crowd had grown to nearly 1,000. Protesters carried signs that read, "Thou shalt not kill," and stopped the execution. Yet inside the California Supreme Court, the decision had already been made. In a 4-3 vote, the justices denied Chessman's final appeal, but his attorneys refused to give up. With one last motion in hand, Asher and Davis rushed to the federal courthouse in San Francisco. They placed their hopes in you, District Judge Louis Goodman. Goodman did not dismiss them. He read their arguments and reportedly admitted he needed more time to consider. But time had run out. At 9:30 in the morning, as Goodman flipped through the pages, Chessman was being led from the ready room into the gas chamber. He shook his head when asked for final words. His plan was simple: if the gas caused pain, he would nod, signaling to the reporters that death by cyanide was not the humane process officials claimed. By 9:59 in the morning, Judge Goodman realized he had to act. He told his secretary to call San Quentin and halt the execution until he could issue a written stay. But the secretary dialed the wrong number. By the time she reached the prison on her second attempt, it was too late. The lever had been pulled, cyanide pellets dropped into acid beneath the chair, and poison gas began to rise. Witnesses described Chessman inhaling deeply, hoping to hasten unconsciousness, but his plan failed. Soon, he was coughing, gasping, convulsing. Then came the nodding violent, repeated, the signal he had promised. It was not painless. Dozens of journalists in the witness gallery recorded every movement, every gasp. At 10:12 in the morning, Caryl Chessman slumped forward, officially pronounced dead. Only afterward did the public learn about the secretary's misdial, the fatal delay that may have cost Chessman one last chance at reprieve. Chessman's execution became an international scandal. In Europe, headlines declared it unpleasant to be an American. For many, his death symbolized a justice system too rigid to admit doubt. For others, it was simply the long overdue end for an arrogant criminal who had manipulated the courts and media for years. Regardless of opinion, one truth remained: Caryl Chessman had turned his cell into a stage, his typewriter into a weapon, and his case into a movement. His words still echo today in debates about capital punishment, wrongful convictions, and the power of one man to fight the system until his very last breath. Dear friends, when the clock finally struck for Caryl Chessman, it was not just a man who died in San Quentin's gas chamber. It was an era, a clash of law, politics, and conscience. For 12 long years, he fought with his pen and his voice, buying time in ways no other had done before. To his supporters, he was proof that the death penalty could ensnare a flawed conviction and expose the cruelty of the process itself. To his detractors, he was an unrepentant criminal who deserved the fate that came to him. Yet, as his body slumped forward that morning in 1960, the world was left asking whether justice had truly been served, or whether the state had silenced its most defiant prisoner. His story remains one of the most haunting reminders of how fragile certainty can be. If you found this journey powerful, subscribe to Deathwatch Diaries for more prison documentary stories.